You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. On today's episode from the Legislative Summit in Washington, D.C., please welcome ALPA National Manager of Policy and Legislation, Jeff Pavlak, ALPA President, Captain Jason Ambrosi, and from your Delta MEC Government Affairs team, Captain Jessie Elliott and First Officer Brenden Cantwell. Here's your host, Ryan Argenta.
Welcome back to the Engage podcast. We're recording from the 10th Annual Legislative Summit in Washington, D.C. I'm here with ALPA President Jason Ambrosi. Jason, welcome back to the Engage podcast.
Thanks, Ryan. It's great to be back with the Delta pilots again.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. Just like old times, we've got the band back together. I'm also here with Jeff Pavlak. He's the ALPA National Manager of Policy and Legislation. Brenden Cantwell, he's from Government Affairs at the Delta MEC. He's also a member of the PAC Steering Committee. Jessie Elliott, Government Affairs and District Advocate. We got a room full of people. Jason, why are we here? What are the priorities? And how does this affect Delta pilots or pilots as a whole?
It's essential for us to advocate on behalf of our membership on Capitol Hill. It's protecting our profession. We're a labor group. We engage with other labor groups, but getting grassroots pilots out here in front of congressional leaders. So we have an excellent group of professional government affairs folks that deal with these people day in and day out. But having pilots in uniform speak to congressional leaders makes such a difference because we pilots are experts in our field. So nobody knows more about flying airplanes, safety, security of the traveling public and cargo more than pilots, right? Where we have the vested interest. So us being here, getting out there and carrying our message. Right now, is FAA reauthorization is the big thing we're talking about. So number one, make sure nothing bad happens because there are special interests out there that want to lower training requirements. They want to put profits ahead of safety. We've had the safest decade in history, 99.8% reduction in fatalities in the last decade since the 2010 FAA reauthorization bill. And yet some are trying to change some of those rules back to the way it was for profit. So we're here to make sure that doesn't happen. We're also advocating for fair and open skies. So the fair and open skies is essentially saying when foreign air carrier permits are granted, that they have to look at labor and the public interest test and say, how does this affect labor? We do not want outsourcing of U.S. flying to cheaper labor from around the world. So adding that in there is essentially saying, no, you will take a look at how this affects U.S. labor and aviation employees.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to draw attention to this summit because it kind of happens, and I say in the background, because while we're out flying the line, doing our thing, being in the profession that we do so well, in the background, there are pilots from all airlines, from all ALPA carriers, and legislative staffers who work for ALPA National professionally. They're not pilots, they're civilians, so to speak. But to see them in action and to come to this 3-day summit where everybody gets together, talks about the top priorities that affect pilots at every level in their personal lives and quality of life, the career progression, right? And to learn and to take those priorities directly to the members of Congress is huge. I mean, that's hugely important. This is my first summit and I've learned so much already just in day 2. And tomorrow we'll go visit with our elected representatives in Congress. So it's really cool to see.
It's important to note that it's not just these 2 priorities. That's all of ALPA's priorities. We have a list of them from still fighting secondary barriers over 20 years after 9/11, primary barriers for our cargo brothers and sisters, cabin air quality, security issues, FFDO. We have all kinds of things we're fighting, but we can't go in on this legislative summit and go in with 12 items. So
yeah, it'd be overwhelming, right?
But we are fighting, and it's not just this time. These pilots that are here with us this week will then be able to advocate throughout the year. So it's not just a one-time event. We'll have people that are able to go out in the field. District advocates is somewhere here with us today. They'll be able to go out and advocate on behalf of it. And again, we're pilot partisan. We don't get involved in any other issues than things that affect our profession.
Love it. And Jessie, you're a district advocate. Can you talk to some of the things that you do outside of the summit that happens every year?
That's right. Yeah. So in district, I have a team of 4 other Delta pilots that help me make the connections at home with the in-district staff, but also with the member when they're on recess or when they come home on Fridays. And we just kind of reiterate the points that are brought up here and all the additional points that come up throughout the year. But it really gives us a chance to make that personal connection where we say, I'm here in your district. I'm driving to your office from my house. And it's just a little bit more personal connection and something that's more relatable to the member, helps them remember you. So then when we come back here to DC, they can remember exactly where you're from and how they have that connection with you.
Yeah, building those relationships, right? And maintaining those throughout the year. And that's what our government affairs team does at the Delta MEC level and ALPA national level, which has been impressive to see. And so here we are. So we've been talking some pretty high level stuff. We're at the legislative summit. We're meeting with Congress tomorrow, pitching pilot centric issues, the things that are important to all pilots, especially Delta pilots. And so here you are, you're talking, again, some pretty high level stuff, relationships with congressmen and senators throughout the year. But Jesse, you're a 320 captain in Seattle. And Brenden, what do you do?
I'm a 330 FO in New York.
Which I find fascinating. Like, that's incredible to me. That everybody has their skill sets. You have what you like to do, what you want to represent. And so we're talking about the PAC, which has been potentially a confusing issue, but what is the PAC? First of all, what does it stand for? What is it? It's a lobby, right? This is money raised through donation. It's not part of dues. It's very separate from dues, and it's used in a very different way. Can you talk to that?
Yeah. So the Political Action Committee is ALPA's lobbying arm or effort as a labor union, rather than having each individual pilot perhaps make political contributions to candidates that support our priorities. We can take advantage of being a labor union and pool all of that money together to have even greater effect. So again, like you mentioned, it is illegal to use dues dollars to make a campaign contribution. ALPA PAC is voluntary, completely separate of dues money. That dues money only goes to operating ALPA. The ALPA PAC contributions just go to doing what we can to elect pilot partisan members of the House and the Senate.
So when you say pilot partisan, we're not playing politics here. You don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, and independent, but if you stand to represent pilots in general, then the PAC and ALPA will support your campaign.
Yes. It's important that our pilots know we work in perhaps the most highly regulated industry in our country. Every aspect of our professional and even our personal lives, our right to be a part of this union, Congress has oversight over and gives us that ability. So whether it's retirement, how long we can work during a day, every aspect of our jobs, not just when we're at work, but also at home, is affected by Congress. So it's important that we're active in DC. It's important to know that there's a conception that money in politics is a bit ugly at times, but it's important to understand that our opponents are involved as well. And if we're not part of that, if we're not involved ourselves, that we won't be able to get our message across. The overarching goal of ALPA PAC is to get as many pilot-friendly legislators elected. We also look at other things. We look, when we're choosing to support a candidate, we look at sort of the influence they'll have on the issues we deal with, right? Will they have oversight of the FAA, right? So will they serve on the appropriate committee, like the Transportation Infrastructure Committee? Obviously, they will have a greater influence on our priorities. So we may tend to support a candidate that has that influence. Do they serve on leadership in both either the House or the Senate? Obviously, they have a bit more power in getting legislation passed or driving our priorities than other members might have. So that's how we decide, who gets money and how much they get. But it's a collaborative effort with ALPA President Jason and several other pilots from other airlines. There's 2 Delta pilots on the PAC steering committee because we generate over 30% of the receipts of ALPA PAC. United also does the same. So they have 2 members and then some smaller airlines as well. So it's a collaborative effort. We take ALPA staff, they give us advisement on who they recommend, and we discuss it and come to a consensus. The overarching goal of ALPA PAC is to get as many pilot-friendly legislators elected. We also look at other things when we're choosing to support a candidate. We look at sort of the influence they'll have on the issues we deal with.
I was going to say something about how that PAC money looks on the ground too.
Yeah.
About what do we actually do with it? Well, obviously we support campaigns, but we also form special relationships and connections with these members. And it offers the opportunity when we're passing legislation to then go kind of leverage connections and relationships that have been built through PAC events, really.
Yeah, it's important that we are involved politically and that we have a strong PAC and that we're influential in DC, because if we aren't, someone else is driving the narrative, right? We need to be the ones telling our story, our side of the story. And the way we do that is via the PAC. We build relationships with members of Congress, so we are able to drive the narrative rather than having Delta management or an airplane manufacturer like Boeing or Airbus kind of driving our narrative or trying to tell our story. It's important that we're the ones doing it, that we're in the room with the legislators and the decision makers to give our point of view.
Yeah, because the airlines are doing it, right? They have their own lobby funds. They're contributing significant dollars to influence the political connections for the things that are important to them. And so this is our side of the story. And you let the legislators make a decision on their own, but you give them the information that they need to make the right decision. And historically, ALPA's done a very good job influencing those lawmakers, right? And so can we just shout out a couple of things that have happened in the past that maybe the PAC influenced or ALPA did? Secondary barrier, we're still working on that. But if you're on a bus, if you're on a wide body Airbus, you know what we're talking about in secondary barrier. And ALPA wants that in every airplane. Flags of convenience. We've talked to MEC, the Middle East 3 airlines, a lot of scope stuff, new routes, ICAO. Big one is the 1,500-hour rule for regional carriers. What else is there? FDO is a product, and KCM is a product of
FDO. A change to the retirement age has been introduced recently, like we talked about. So we're defending that to maintain the current retirement age.
Yeah.
Jeff Pavlak is going to be talking later, and he'd be a really great person to discuss, to be able to fill you in on what his role was in getting the payroll support program passed to keep pilots.
That was during COVID, right? During the pandemic. Yeah.
So he was instrumental in making that happen, and is the perfect person to talk to about.
So if you were a UNA, you can thank Jeff and the ALPA staff and the legislative assistants who are here.
Yeah, it's critical to know that ALPA PAC doesn't buy a particular vote. It doesn't buy a particular piece of legislation. It's just to build a relationship so that we become their expert when it comes to aviation issues. They rely on us for input. If there's an opportunity to work together going forward, it makes it that much easier.
So I've had a lot of people on either side of the political aisle say, I don't want to support that party, the other party. And the game is still being played, whether or not we are at the table. And so, like Brenden said, that just allows opportunities for the opposition to get in there and drive a different narrative. So pulling money out of the PAC is actually so dangerous for our profession and our future. Allows the opposition to take a bigger piece of the stage, bigger stand on the stage.
And what's your little jingle?
Yeah. If you're not at the table, then you're on the menu, right?
Right. And you got to pay to play.
You got to pay to play.
And I will say the ALPA PAC is historically the most bipartisan labor PAC. It's really not even close. We're typically 55 to 45, or even closer, tighter margins. Those margins swing back and forth between D's and R's, a lot of times depending on who is in power at the time. So we are by far the most bipartisan labor PAC. Our priorities typically garner bipartisan support, and that's a real priority of ours. It's why we have so much credibility on Capitol Hill, because we come and talk about the issues that are critical to our industry. We just stick to what we know, and it's usually gains a lot of bipartisan support.
Yeah. And one thing I've noticed here is that the representatives, the members, Congress and senators are super responsive and really supportive of pilots in general. We've had a number of speakers throughout the summit, and tomorrow we're going out to their offices to meet with individual members directly. But yeah, it's been really cool to see how supportive they are of pilots, especially going in uniform, and they want to take pictures and they want to establish those relationships because frankly, I think they deal with corporate types all the time. And this is a different perspective. A lot of people are veterans. A lot of people have come from different backgrounds and professions. And so it's a really cool reception to see.
We've heard from different representatives on both sides, again, Republican and Democrat, this whole weekend. And it was so interesting to listen to Congressman Bacon from Nebraska. It was interesting to hear him say, yeah, typically Republicans aren't associated with labor, which they do want to change that narrative, but they are associated with security and safety. These are messages that affect them every day as they fly to DC every single week. So we can champion our issues to any side, Republican or Democrat.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. And something that the traveling public and the elected reps are super familiar with. Like flying on an airliner nowadays is so common that it's become, I went to a comedy show and that was the butt of the joke. Like flying airlines was the bit, right? It's so commonplace that it reaches a wide audience, and Congress are no different, right? And they understand that, their constituents understand it. So it's a huge priority for them. I do want to ask, we see the lanyards and the bag tags of Back the Pack. How do you do it?
So it's really easy. There's a great ALPA app that not only you can sign up for the PAC and adjust your contribution, increase your contribution via one-time payment, or you can do a check off from our paychecks, which makes it really easy. But also on that app, there's a lot of great information about what ALPA's priorities are in Washington currently. So you can give to the PAC and you can also kind of check in on what's going on in DC too. And it's a great app that's updated regularly, and it's important to come back to periodically.
And the highest level of this, well, there's a new one that's being introduced this year, but the highest level currently is only $84 a month.
So that was my next question, is like, what amount is reasonable? What amount, is there a suggested amount, or is there a minimum? Can I give $5? Can I give $500? Like, where is
you could give any amount. There's no minimum. There is a maximum. The maximum is $5,000 a year. That's a federal law. Right now, our highest level is the Benke Circle, which comes out to $1,000 a year, which I think is a fair investment in the return you're getting, like Jesse mentioned, with the payroll support program and sort of defending our careers. That's a lot of what the government affairs team kind of has to do in Washington. Is we're always advocating for policies that we're in support of or that we are important to us as pilots, but we're also defending from some pretty bad ideas that could come across the desk there. So that's why it's so important that everyone is involved and educated and engaged.
Yeah. I mean, $1,000 seems like a lot of money, but when viewed as that investment, and as we get into the summer months and you're flying your third green slip of the month, it's a little more reasonable to contribute to the PAC in any way, right?
If you're serious about the longevity of your career and the progression we're on now with the great successes we had with negotiations, it's important we keep that momentum moving forward. We've mentioned the safety record lately. There's no reason we should be rolling that back. So it's important to keep the momentum with our careers right now and invest in future of that career. So the PAC is a really easy way to do it.
And that's really the information I want to get out. But yeah, if you're inclined to be a part of it or contribute, you can download the app. You can get in there through your account, and or reach out to government affairs at the Delta MEC. And what's the best way to do that?
Straight from the ALPA website. You can log in and get to the PAC that way.
Yeah. And we're trying to broaden our audience here, but for those who would like to call, 1-800-USA-ALPA goes to the main number at the Delta MEC in Atlanta. Ask for the Government Affairs Committee, and they'll put you in touch with somebody who can help you from there. Here's the thing. So pilots, we always say we should hire professional lawyers. We should hire professional negotiators. We should hire professional insert name here, but we do. Like, you go to the 7th floor at the Delta MEC and there's a slew of professional labor attorneys. And oddly enough, they're at the pinnacle of their career. It's like, so where do you go next? And they're like, no, I've arrived, man. Like, to work as a labor attorney in a labor union and for the largest aviation union in the world, like, they've arrived. It's cool to see. And so this is also happening at the national level, where Jeff and others are professional lobbyists on our behalf.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier about coming out to the summit and kind of seeing the positive reputation that ALPA has with members of Congress. And a lot of that work is done through Elizabeth and her team, a great team of lobbyists with a ton of experience on Capitol Hill. They're on the Hill representing us every day. They're taking meetings with members of Congress and their staff, meeting with folks at the FAA and DOT, folks at the administration. They're our sort of eyes and ears, and a lot of times our voice on Capitol Hill on a daily basis. There are opportunities when Delta pilots will come up on the Hill and do the work, but for the most part, they're there every day in and day out, standing up for the profession and getting our priorities to those members of Congress. So they're invaluable.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's impressive. Let's leave it there. Here with Jeff Pavlak. He's the ALPA National Manager of Policy and Legislation. And Jeff, first of all, welcome to the Engage podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And so you are an ALPA employee. You're paid by dues dollars, but essentially you're a professional lobbyist on our behalf.
Correct. Yeah. I work for ALPA International, but obviously work for all pilots. And my job, such as it is on the day-to-day basis, is to lead, generally speaking, all of our advocacy efforts on Capitol Hill, particularly with a keen eye towards the specific aviation and labor issues that we deal with on the committees that write those laws.
And you're not a pilot.
I am not a pilot, and I think everyone will be happy that I'm not a pilot.
So What's your background? How do you get into this position? Give us the skinny on that.
Yeah, I'll give you the skinny. I grew up in a household in which my grandparents were union members. It was always an important part of my life. And when I was in college, I worked on Capitol Hill briefly for a member of Congress from Arizona, Gabrielle Giffords. But I didn't necessarily love working on the Hill, honestly, which seems funny because it's a lot of what I do now. So I left and I took a job at the AFL-CIO. I started out as a researcher, and I quickly became like a very kid-aged lobbyist at, I think, 25, and handled the AFL-CIO, which is the umbrella organization for essentially all the unions in the U.S., including ALPA, were members, all of their transportation and essentially construction portfolio. And after about roughly 8 or so years doing that, ALPA, for whatever reason, decided to take a chance on me. So I ended up at ALPA.
Well, we're glad they did because you're doing great work for us and we appreciate it. I want to show the level of involvement here that government affairs and legislative affairs has. So today, the pilots at the Legislative Summit are going out to the congressional offices, to the senatorial offices, and they're meeting with the representatives and talking about pilot-centric issues, things that will affect them. And there's a whole slew of items that they're talking about, including secondary barrier, age 67 legislation, which is back on the table, talking about open and fair skies, things like that. But I also want to bring out some of the past stuff that we have as tangible evidence, if you will, right? And so you worked with Art Luby, who's a senior counsel at ALPA National. During COVID and the pandemic, you essentially wrote the PSP language, which is the payroll support program. And if you're a UNA, you can thank Jeff Pavlak directly because you weren't furloughed because of that legislation or that work. So how did that come about? Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was a tough one. Obviously, as the pandemic was approaching, a group of the unions were down in Florida, and it became increasingly clear that this thing was very substantial and that airline travel was essentially going to bottom out. And so there was a lot of chatter amongst the unions about, we need to do something. And then I, for whatever reason, got tasked basically and told, figure it out. So I drove from Orlando to Miami, and I locked myself in a room for 4 days, and I printed out the last airline bailout relief package, which was after 9/11, and printed out the relief packages from essentially the big three automakers in 2000 and roughly 2008, 2010, when they were put in receivership, and looked at all those things and tried to figure out what mistakes we made in the past. Particularly in both of those packages, the workers kind of took it on the chin. Everything from changing people's collective bargaining rights to extracting concessions to tiering out their contracts. So I was very focused on not repeating that. So I put together a 10-page draft of a whole host of things, some of it beyond what ended making it into law, but it was the payroll pass-through, the restrictions on any effect on collective bargaining, which is very important because the government during 9/11, I hope people know, essentially gave out grants or loans predicated on changing collective bargaining agreements. They said, if you would like a loan, you need to cut your labor costs in half, and we won't give you the loan unless you make a bunch of structural changes to your CBAs. And obviously there was the anti-furlough prohibition to make it so that the airlines didn't do this. And importantly, we had a whole host of other things. We tried to change bankruptcy laws, and that was in the mix. It didn't stick, but the airlines really just wanted cash, but cash with no restrictions in terms of what they could have done. So they would have gotten cash. And obviously when airline demand plummets to 5%, there's not a lot of appetite to pay people. So I think our concern was that. And I do owe a shout out, as you mentioned, to Art, who, after I took the first pass through, Art and I talked essentially every day, and he was my voice of wisdom on some of my ideas, quite frankly. And Marcus Migliore, also at ALPA, was a huge ad for me.
Yeah, Marcus Migliore we had on. He was the star of an episode we call Lawyers, Guns, and Money.
That's the most exciting podcast name on that.
So you can refer back to that and hear from Marcus on the Railway Labor Act and RLA related stuff. So you wrote up all that stuff. You worked with Art, and then your day to day is going to Capitol Hill and talking about these issues, and you have these relationships, right? You're not just showing up cold calling, right? You have relationships with these legislators and you're bringing these ideas and pitching that you're essentially lobbying for ALPA pilot. And
yeah, we spend a lot of time cultivating relationships, but it's also in a dorky technical sense that I call legislative subsidy. Obviously, the government, shock of shocks, doesn't know everything. So they need a lot of advice. The airline industry is a very unique industry with a lot of complications, and pilots are a very important part of the airline industry, to put it mildly, since you all are the people that make the planes actually go places. So not only do we have relationships that we spend a lot of time cultivating, but people need our advice and counsel and assistance helping write legislation, most frequently, including now, negotiating legislation. So it's a complicated web of not only building relationships where people rely on us, but also to provide them counsel on how to do things. So a lot of my day personally is spent dealing with the committee staff. So the way Congress works, there are committees that essentially write the laws, and they have specialized lawyers and staffers who spend their whole days focusing just on airlines, for example. And I just, like, these last number of weeks, basically have been on the phone with the staffs anywhere between 1 and 10 times every day, both having conversations, but also, I don't want to be too cavalier, but having a very big insight into the processes of what's going on. And that's my job, to make sure that nothing that goes in a bill doesn't harm our membership.
yeah, so last couple questions. What keeps you up at night?
Let's take the FAA reauthorization bill, which is why all the pilots are in town this week. That's going to be a bill that's going to be 500 pages of very dense legal text that has a lot of bells and whistles on that could get confusing very easily. Sometimes not for reasons that are necessarily bad intention, but it's hard to manage the totality of that. For me, it's making sure all the things we care about are written correctly, and then also that nothing inadvertently gets snuck in. Like, for instance, things involving the airspace or air traffic management that aren't things that I would normally think of, but matter a lot to pilots, are done in a thoughtful and safe way. So it's just making sure a very large bill is written correctly. And then secondarily, that as you go through the process, because there's a process to how bills become laws that can get very unwieldy, trying your best, and our best, I should say, because we have a wonderful team here, to ensure that things don't change or otherwise go a negative direction. If there's an amendment that's added, for example, that would complicate things, just trying to manage, essentially, it feels like managing like a freeway, but you don't have any control over the cars and trying to navigate it.
To kind of jump on one of the things you just pointed out about the language, interestingly enough, with the Fair and Open Skies Act, we're here really lobbying for one word change, which is, instead of the DOT should do a public interest test, they must do a public interest test. So that's kind of what Jeff is talking about. The little things within all of this language, this 500-page document, one little word can make a huge difference in our careers.
Yeah, so it's just like writing a contract or a new PWA, right? You can have this conceptual idea that makes sense to everybody, and this is what we want. And in one word creates that loophole that we're all subject to, right? So that's an important piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very important for pilots to understand, because they obviously spend so much time bargaining and looking at the contract. I mean, it's essentially no different. Art and I always talk about this. Art Libby is, a lot of what we both do is negotiating, right? It's people send me something that's written and we don't necessarily like it, and we send something back that's written differently, and you work back and forth, much as you guys do with your management, to try to get the optimal outcome. And that sometimes is a lot of high stakes sort of playing chicken, but also sometimes some very thoughtful, trying to find common sense resolution. It just depends on who you're working with, but it's essentially no different than how you guys work so hard, and you at Delta in particular have worked so hard to successfully get a contract. It's the same sort of mechanism.
Well, Jeff, final question. What do you need from ALPA pilots? Like, how can a Delta pilot help support you in your role and in your job?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of things. I would say a couple of things. To make a plug for the PAC, I mean, the PAC is not this tool where we walk in and that you can just do whatever you want with it and people just fall over you because you have a PAC. But the PAC, in a relative sense, we are an important player in the airline industry, but we're not the largest union in the United States. But the PAC allows us to get to know and cultivate relationships with members, which at the end of the day redounds to our benefit. If we did not have a PAC, it would make it much harder to do a good job for you all. So I think that's one thing. I think at the local level, the more people can get involved and try to cultivate relationships with members of Congress, it's always very valuable. Members of Congress like to know that constituents care. And when constituents are pilots, I think that's very valuable. And I think however people want to participate in ALPA is important. Obviously, we have government affairs folks and some wonderful Delta government affairs folks that we really enjoy working with. I think the more people can support their activities, that's valuable. And I think just more broadly, participating in ALPA on the pilot end just makes us all stronger collectively. And it's very helpful.
Awesome. Jeff Pavlak, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for the work that you do. And I do want to plug, this is my first legislative summit, hugely eye-opening. It's been a really wonderful experience being here and meeting the staff that supports us and everybody that's here. Jessie, you don't have to be part of government affairs, or you don't have to be a volunteer at the union in order to be here. It's open to all pilots, all right? All Delta pilots. There's multiple airlines here within the ALPA structure. If somebody wants to get involved, say next year, how do they come to the summit and be a participant?
Right. So as Brenden said, you can obviously go to the Delta MEC webpage and go to specifically the Government Affairs website to see the chair and the vice chair, reach out to them to try and get involved. But also locally, there's different district advocates that you can connect with and say, hey, I live in this district, I'd like to get involved. And also every year we take different teams here to the summit. So if you're interested in trying to come here and learn what we do here every year, there's a registration that comes out generally every May, and anyone and everyone can sign up for that. So we encourage you to look for that.
Yeah, look for your email, right? It comes from ALPA National, from Jason Ambrosi this year.
Yeah.
You can look for that invitation, fill out the link. It was super easy to do. And I encourage everybody at all levels to throw your name in the hat. Come at least once, come to a legislative summit. It's eye-opening and it's a pretty cool experience.
For sure. 100%.
So, well, thanks for that.
I just want to say thank you, and to all the folks who may be listening. We appreciate what you do for a living, and you have your government affairs representative folks, but feel free to reach out to us. We'd like to keep avenues open for you all to both communicate with us, but to understand what we do. So feel free to reach out to us directly or through your GA reps. We're very happy to serve you all.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Jeff Pavlak, ALPA National Manager of Policy and Legislation. ALPA President Jason Ambrosi, Brenden Cantwell, Jessie Elliott, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for the work that you do. This has been Engaged, the podcast for Delta pilots. Thanks for listening. My name is Ryan Argenta. Stay safe and keep the rubber on the road.
You're listening to Engage, the podcast for Delta pilots. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform, and receive notifications when a new episode is available.